Throughout the 1980s, Nintendo was an omnipresent force in the gaming world, dominating the home console market with dozens of headliners. The Legend of Zelda, Donkey Kong, Punch-Out!, and of course, Super Mario Bros. The Plumber duo were booming in popularity, with Mario becoming the face of Nintendo. As their mascot, he could be seen on just about every product known to man. And with 1990 rolling around, the massively popular and long-awaited Super Mario Bros. 3 would be released. Rival company, Sega, was growing desperate. Their 16-bit console was on the market for nearly 2 years, and sales were down. Something had to be done. Then President Hayao Nakayama declared that change must be made. Sega needed to make their mark on the world. And then, a plan was made. Create a new game featuring a character that could be sold as the face of Sega. And from there, Sonic the Hedgehog was born. History was made. Racing onto the scene, boasting high-speed gameplay, Sonic the Hedgehog would serve as a sort of rival to the evergreen Mario. Sonic revitalized interest in the Genesis and kicked off sort of a revolution. The tall and mighty Nintendo now had competition, and they would continue this rivalry for many years to come. But just what is it exactly that helped Sonic make a name for himself, as well as remaining relevant all these years later? It's simple, really. Extremely simple when you get to the bare bones of it. He's cool. Sonic the Hedgehog is one cool character. And right from the very start, as Oshima and Naka were working on Sega's next big thing, his most defining trait was just that: being cool. Arguably the most important trait of his, as it is what helped separate him from the competition. The devil-may-care attitude and sharp design worked together with the impressive gameplay to generate a lasting impact on the public. Though, this element of his has become muddied over time. As times changed, so would Sonic. The resulting era saw the Blue Blur attempt to both adapt to the trends of the time while staying true to the series' core identity. Fans saw him go through triumphant highs as well as unfortunate lows. And while there may have been rough patches, Sonic has never fallen to obscurity, remaining one of Sega's most popular franchises as well as imprinting himself on the public mind forever. Today, let's take a trip through the many eras of Sonic the Hedgehog and examine his radical aesthetic, seeing just what makes him so special. Strap on your running shoes and prepare to run with me as we look at Sonic's cool factor. All good stories have a beginning. And as mentioned previously, Sonic's began around 1990. Sega were in desperate need of their next big thing. Someone who would blow the world away and get those Genesis consoles flying off the shelves. The duo of Yuji Naka and Naoto Oshima would get right to work, conceptualizing a game and a face to go along with it. Oshima would be the man responsible for the design of Sonic and his world, with Naka on the programming side. There were countless drafts done for the design of Sonic, such as this dog character and a rabbit that would go on to become Rystar. Designer Naoto Oshima would take 3 of the designs he had drawn to New York City and ask passerbys which stood out the most. These designs being a hedgehog, a dog, and what would become Eggman. In the number 1 spot was the hedgehog character, followed by the Eggman design, and in third was the dog. According to Oshima, he believed the hedgehog to be the most popular due to it being cute, but also because it transcends race and gender and things like that. When creating Sonic, he had the intention of making something cool, but also a design that would be easy for children to draw, something easily understood and without borders. In his words,
"Cool can be something that's more on the surface, visual or expressive, or just cool character design. But that wasn't the cool that we were looking for," said Oshima. Instead, he said the team wanted a character that was cool because of his attitude. He wouldn't follow others' orders and would always fight for what he believed in.
Despite this, the final result was both cool in attitude and design. His striking blue spikes and red shoes make for an instantly iconic design. This sleek look worked in perfect harmony with Sonic's rebellious attitude and quick wit to create something truly remarkable. Sonic the Hedgehog would kick off the trend of mascot platformers, especially those with an animal character. Rocky Rodent, Awesome Possum, and many more to follow. I mean, who could forget Mr. Nuts? All of them trying to get a slice of the pie while not realizing that the secret to Sonic's success wasn't just being a plucky anthropomorphic mascot. Popular franchises such as Crash Bandicoot and Spyro the Dragon owe thanks to Sonic for paving the way. Sonic the Hedgehog would release to critical success, taking the world by storm. It was an instant hit, hitting that mark that Sega had so desperately hoped for. Sonic would replace Altered Beast as the pack-in title for the system, and those who had missed out were given a chance to fill out a voucher for their own free copy of the game. The success of Sonic gave Sega a leg to stand on and created a genuine rivalry between them and Nintendo. With Sonic on top, Sega wasted no time and would turn Sonic into a full-on franchise. The Blue Blur would receive several mainline sequels, spin-off titles that would release on both home console and portable, as well as other adaptations. The universe of Sonic at this time was blossoming. Each medium had slight variances between them, but all held the core aesthetics. A colorful world, a narrative that saw Sonic taking on Eggman, and a focus on freedom. One of the most prevalent themes is one of nature versus artificial. Sonic and Tails face off with Eggman and his mechanical monstrosities. Forests would be set ablaze, animals would be held captive, and pollution can be seen frequently. Sonic CD takes this even further by pitting Sonic against his own inorganic doppelganger. The music of these original games was very in line with trends at the time. The sound was pop-inspired and helped separate Sonic from the competition. The sound of Sonic was just as important as the gameplay itself. Following trends, the ever-popular King of Pop would even lend his talents to Sega for Sonic 3. This just going to show how dominant of a force Sonic was at this time. The character Sonic the Hedgehog would take shape during this time. A strong sense of justice with a carefree attitude. Sonic moves fast and has a bit of a patience problem. Whether it was the games, the Saturday morning cartoons, or the OVA, Sonic held these core tenets throughout. The coolness of Sonic at this time derived from both the character himself and his place in the world. A rebellious spirit surrounded Sega as they took a stand against Nintendo's domination of the games market. They defined their company and Sonic on this principle of rebellion. Genesis does what Nintendo don't. Progressively though, times would change. Sonic's domination would slow down and there would be a lull. Troubled development and other issues behind the scenes put Sonic in a sort of funky spot. His last mainline game would be Sonic & Knuckles, which would release in 1994. Set up next was Sonic Extreme, but due to internal issues, this game would never come to fruition. In spite of this, Sega weren't just simply sitting by idly. They were working on something big, something that would transform the very identity of Sonic. Leading up to their next game, Sega would go on to tease for a new Sonic, and this game would be none other than Sonic Adventure. The triumphant return of Sonic the Hedgehog. Something that would change the game forever. Sonic Adventure would reintroduce the world to Sonic and his world, turning everything on its head. Sonic and friends would tout new designs drawn by the immaculate Yuji Uekawa. The gameplay would no longer be a traditional 2D side-scroller. Now, the Sonic world was rendered in complete 3D. There were fully explorable 3D locations, and in these, players could find more traditional linear levels. Sonic Adventure took full advantage of the update in hardware, holding back absolutely nothing. The central antagonist besides Eggman would be Chaos, a primal entity made entirely of water. Director Takashi Iizuka stated that he wanted to create something that hadn't yet been possible with technology, in addition to raising the stakes of the game. Much like the preceding games, Adventure treads new water for the gaming world, showcasing innovative level design, cutting-edge graphics, and an edgy new sound. The poppy music of the original era was mostly gone, with Adventure featuring a variety of vocal tracks. The most prevalent of these is Open Your Heart, which served as the theme, but it's also worth mentioning that each character would receive their own theme. Sonic Adventure would also feature a much deeper story than anything seen thus far. This story would build upon the previous mythos set up during the Genesis era, showing the past of the Echidna race and adding lore to the Chaos Emeralds. The characterization of Sonic and his friends would develop as well. Sonic would show slight signs of maturity, which fell in line with his updated look. Previous traits were also expanded upon, such as Tails' talent with invention and Knuckles' duty to the Master Emerald. Adventure would feature a number of massive set pieces that helped it stand out from the crowd. These include moments such as the whale chase in Emerald Coast, snowboarding down Ice Cap, and the monstrous boss fight against Chaos's perfect form. The overall atmosphere and vibe of Sonic Adventure was bigger and better than anything seen before. In order to properly capture this massive scale, Sonic Team traveled to various real-world locations for inspiration. Touting new looks, Sonic and his friends now look slightly different than they did before. The reasoning for this wasn't to just generate buzz around the game. It was also done in order for the characters to better integrate to the new direction Sonic was headed. At the forefront of the planning phase for Adventure was the game's plot. Due to this, it was deemed necessary for the cast to get a fresh coat of paint to suit the new world. As mentioned previously, Uekawa would reimagine the cast, citing graffiti art as an inspiration behind his redesigns. Another sign of the changing times and what was in. Trading out the more cartoony, rubber hose-inspired Hedgehog for the more modern and radical. Sonic Adventure and the games to follow would operate around these new sensibilities. The transition towards a slightly mature atmosphere helped Sonic to be cooler, causing the games to resonate with both younger players and those that had been playing since the original games, almost as if they were growing up alongside Sonic. This aesthetic would explode upon the release of Adventure 2, seeing multiple new faces enter the scene: Shadow the Hedgehog and Rouge the Bat. Both of these characters embody these new design principles. In addition to this, the narrative would take precedence once again, a surprisingly deep story that follows Sonic and his new doppelganger as they take on Eggman. Both Adventure and Adventure 2 were landmark pieces of software, well received by critics and fans alike, as well as being one of the primary reasons people picked up a Dreamcast. Unfortunately though, the dream would come to a premature end. The Dreamcast would be discontinued in 2001, giving it only 2 years on the market. This was also the same year Adventure 2 was released. This failure would incite massive change at Sega, leaving Sonic and his pals to wander the gaming landscape as vagabonds. The aesthetics of Sonic remained mostly the same, but internally this was the first stumble. Soon, the core of Sonic would be shaken, leading to a complete identity crisis. Heroes would be the first mainline entry after the Adventure games, and marked the first signs that the structure was shaky. The gameplay would change completely, with the game having players control 3 characters at once through linear levels. The attitude was more lighthearted overall, but that isn't to say that Heroes was sanitized. It still had its fair share of edge, with the redesigned Chaotix and Neo-Metal Sonic. Then there would be Shadow the Hedgehog. Shadow's solo outing would do the opposite of Heroes and double down on the edge factor. Heavy vocal tracks and a dark, brooding storyline. Shadow the Hedgehog would follow the titular Hog as he armed himself with firearms and rode a motorcycle, working to uncover the truth of his existence and the circumstances of his rebirth. And though yes, the game did receive middling reviews, it certainly stands out as a product of its time, manifesting all of the coolest traits it possibly could. Alongside these mainline entries, Sonic would once again offer tons of other experiences for fans. All of these carry the same vibes of the time. Sonic Battle, Riders, Advanced, these all felt like natural additions to the series, bringing with them colorful new faces such as Emerl, Cream, and the Babylon Rogues. The subject matter of these spin-offs would also carry the same new edge. Riders features Sonic and pals racing on radical, futuristic hoverboards, where Battle pits familiar faces against one another in a different manner than Sonic the Fighters did. Much like the previous era, Sonic would receive a show. But unlike the cartoons of the past, this Sonic was the star of his own anime. Sonic X would once again demonstrate the more serious tone of the series at this time. Ironically, despite the adaptation being somewhat inaccurate, Sonic X would do extremely well in the West. It would do so well, in fact, that it would receive a third season before Japan would. It wouldn't be until 2019 that Japan would get to see this extra third season. The final release that truly embodied this brand of cool would be the one and only Sonic the Hedgehog. Releasing in 2006 to celebrate the 15th anniversary, this game was meant to be big. Taking its main cues from Adventure 1 and 2, 06 looked to tell a grand story. During development, the question was posed, if Sonic came to the real world, how would that work? Well, if you had guessed by traversing exploding cities and fighting a dimension-sprawling god of time, you'd be right. Yes, this game came out kicking, wearing its ambition on its sleeve and dialing the coolness factor all the way up to 11. Adding to the cool factor would be the additions of characters like Silver the Hedgehog, Blaze the Cat, and of course, Mephiles the Dark. Currently, 06 is an incredibly divisive game, with some looking back on it fondly and others bewailing it for tarnishing the Hedgehog name.
No!
But, back in 2006 when it released, it spelled nothing but doom for Sonic. The game was a buggy mess that performed poorly, an unfortunate result of Sega trying to rush and meet deadlines. 06 had tainted the Sonic brand, leaving both critics and fans disappointed. Some at the time even tried to claim that Sonic had never been good, but well, that's just simply not true. Despite this critical reception, the game managed to perform decently well, going on to be relabeled as a greatest hit on both PlayStation and Xbox. Sales figures, however, would not be enough to salvage the damage that had been done. Sonic the Hedgehog would be the last game of an era, with the next releases lacking the same passion, feeling tonally different from the rest of Sonic's catalog at the time. The scope of Sonic games for years to come would begin to lessen. During this time, side games would also become scarce. The long-awaited Mario and Sonic crossover would occur, manifesting as Mario and Sonic at the Olympics, a colossal letdown for fans on both sides at the time. Though now, the series does have its fair share of die-hard fans. There would also be Sonic Chronicles, the one and only Sonic RPG. Chronicles would be deemed mediocre by critics, and is now completely forgotten by everyone bar the die-hard Sonic crowd. Here's hoping that Sonic gets another shot at an RPG. Maybe one day. After Sonic 06, the next two games would be Sonic and the Secret Rings, and Sonic and the Black Knight. Both games would be exclusive to the Wii, causing a shake-up in gameplay once more. Secret Rings and Black Knight still have a coolness to them that feels familiar, but yet, they also feel subdued. Almost like they were being held back. The narrative of the two titles isn't as deep, lacking the complexities of the previous era. Though, that isn't to say that they have no plot, it's just less in depth compared to what came before. This could be chalked up to the fairy tale theme and overall influence, but the point remains. It's also worth mentioning that these two titles have no connection with the games previously, as well as each other. This would become the norm going forward as Sonic games began to feel less serialized, acting more as one-off entries, not building upon a singular world. The character writing would also suffer from this, not allowing Sonic and his friends to develop in any meaningful way, really. This also is why the worlds of each game would begin to look and feel vastly different to one another. Each game carried its own standalone aesthetic. Despite the cracks in the foundation beginning to show, as I mentioned previously, these games do still have a degree of grit to them. Secret Rings introduced the Dark Spine form for Sonic, which is completely unique to that game, and it goes without saying that it just goes hard. As for Black Knight, we see Sonic in a full suit of golden armor wielding a sword. This is also ridiculously cool, and most likely impossible. I can't imagine that it's easy to run at Sonic speed in gold armor. But it doesn't need to make sense. As long as it looks cool, it goes. Both games would have vocal tracks by series regular Crush 40. Overall, these games' place in Sonic's history is weird. They weren't unrecognizable as Sonic games due to their nature and aesthetics, but they also don't have much that helps them stand out. Feeling like the Sonic formula had been watered down a bit, trying not to sour favor with critics. As for reception, both games performed Reviews stating that there isn't much for hardcore players to sink their teeth into, while also having some middling and unresponsive gameplay. Black Knight would be the more favorable of the two, improving on Secret Rings' faults. Then we have Sonic Unleashed. Sonic Unleashed would technically release between Secret Rings and Black Knight, but I find it best to look at the two Storybook games together. Unleashed wanders from the previous identity of Sonic, but again, it does so in minor ways, much like Secret Rings and Black Knight did. The general attitude is there, featuring Sonic taking on massive opponents and sprawling the world in a huge adventure. However, Unleashed demonstrates the shift away from that era as well. The tone of the game is even more lighthearted. Aside from the lofty enemy Dark Gaia, there is no focus on tension or stakes. It could be boiled down to a simple battle of good versus evil. The narrative structure is simple, as the main focus of the game was its gameplay. Unleashed is more interested in its contrasting gameplay styles and gimmicks, which is understandable given the animosity towards Sonic at this time. As for those gimmicks, we have daytime and nighttime stages. Daytime stages feature Sonic blitzing through various levels themed around different world settings. Nighttime is where the Hedgehog takes over, the fusion of Sonic and a werewolf. The Hedgehog remains one of the most absurd concepts ever presented in Sonic's history, but I won't make fun of him. The jokes at this guy's expense were done to death when Unleashed first released. Though, I will say, the concept behind his inception is interesting. In order to contrast with Sonic's running, the developers decided to give Sonic a way to play with his arms. Thus, we have the Hedgehog in his action stages using his stretchy arms. The world of Sonic Unleashed is much more cartoonish with regards to both the atmosphere and the characters inhabiting it. This isn't the only noticeable difference though, as Unleashed would begin the trend of limiting Sonic's sidecast. Only Tails and Amy would be present, with everyone else mysteriously absent. As mentioned previously, Unleashed would feel more like an isolated event as opposed to the serialized feel of previous Sonic games, making no mention of previous events or established lore. Reception would once again be middling. Most reviews honed in on the Hedgehog, making fun of his design and the gameplay. But not all was bad. Some critics praised the new gameplay style and the look of the world, commenting that the visuals of the game felt similar to a Pixar film. These positive remarks would seemingly influence the direction of games to come. In between Unleashed and the next mainline entry, Colors, the extremely misguided Sonic the Hedgehog 4 would be released. Acting as a sort of mishmash of ideas, Sonic 4 would try to return to the series' roots while appealing to the modern crowd as well. Sega wanted to have something for everyone. Sonic 4 would be broken up into episodes, with there only being 2 episodes to release. There were plans for a third, but it was inevitably cancelled due to the mixed reception. Sonic 4 has a weird spot in Sonic history as one of the most glaring attempts by Sega to hone in on the magic of the past. An incredibly tone-deaf game that also had its fair share of issues. The true start of a new and unique era for Sonic would occur with the release of Sonic Colors. Gone is the rock and roll influence replaced with upbeat pop music. Much like the previous eras of Sonic, Colors was heavily influenced by the trends of the time. Take a look at the popular music and aesthetics at this time. It's hard not to see the similarity. Not just this, Colors also felt the impact of the past years of feedback. This can be seen through all avenues of the game. And while the game did receive positive reviews, something feels off. The core identity of Sonic Colors feels lost, almost aimless, resulting in this new direction for Sonic that would begin to feel sterilized and super safe, lacking the risk that past titles had taken. The narrative of Sonic Colors is extremely simple, featuring no major stakes or conflict. Just a simple back and forth between Sonic and Eggman as the villain builds a theme park. Of course, I don't want to do a disservice to the game, that admittedly is a bit of a simplification. But overall, the game is markedly more safe than the previous titles. There can be a comparison made with Colors and its follow-up Lost World with the original set of games. Both have simpler plots with a focus on the colorful environment and simple gameplay. However, the issue with Colors and Lost World comes from the history of titles behind them. If the series hadn't established that it could handle lofty stories and variety, then these two games wouldn't feel as aimless. Once again, Sonic's friends are all missing in action besides Tails, who, might I mention, almost feels like a cardboard cutout when compared to previous iterations of the character. Speaking of characters, Eggman is also extremely watered down. As far as feeling like a threat, Eggman has always played the border. In some games, he is a near unstoppable force as he almost ends the world. In others, he plays the second fiddle to another, bigger threat. But here in Colors, he's comedic to a fault, feeling much more tame compared to before, almost incompetent at times. Playing the double act you'd see in a comedy routine with his new lackeys, Warbot and Cubot. The character of Sonic himself feels like a hollow stand-in as he makes limp remarks, playing out scenes with Tails and the newly introduced Wisps. Throughout Colors, there are a few times where Sonic will either break the fourth wall or remark on the absurdity of the situation. These tendencies give credence to the moniker fans came up with for this era of Sonic games, aptly titled the Meta Era. And whether you enjoy these jokes or not, they stand in as a clear indicator of the shifting times, being self-referential just for the sake of it. And this self-referencing trend would continue on for the foreseeable future, not just in the games, but outside them too. Around 2015, the Sonic the Hedgehog Twitter account began to take on a different tone, a more comedic attitude, cracking self-referential jokes which, at times, were also self-deprecating. This account became popular amongst fans of Sonic, and also those who enjoyed laughing at him. Before we continue, I want to pose a question. Is this Sonic less Sonic than previous ones? As we go on, the characterization and aesthetics of Sonic truly begin to warp, each iteration really becoming their own thing, existing in a vacuum almost. But is it true to say one is less Sonic than the other? It's tough to come to a conclusion, as in a way, he still does resemble his previous incarnations. He maintains the carefree attitude and the sense of justice, but overall there's an element missing that was present in other games. He's lacking a proper edge to him. The way Sonic would begin to appear in supplementary material took on a different tone as well around this time. Internally, it would seem Sega was attempting to sanitize the image of Sonic, making him easier to digest for audiences. Just take a look at promotional materials at this time. The renders were bland and boring, where before Sonic appeared to be full of life, popping out of the screen ready to blaze a trail. Next up, we have Sonic Lost World, a game that is a product of years of mismatched feedback from both fan and critic. The ultimate culmination of a series that had lost its thunder and became something unfamiliar. Sonic Lost World as a game was met with mixed praise, with some critics enjoying the visual flair of the game. Some even enjoyed the new direction the gameplay had taken. So then, what do I mean when I say it's a game that has lost touch? Well, to start, the narrative of the game is practically non-existent. The tone of the game's story is akin to a Saturday morning cartoon, but with none of the edge that even the Genesis-era games had. The villains of Lost World are the Zeddy, 6 monsters that can only be described as bootleg Bowsers, colorful plastic toys that would be included with a breakfast cereal. Their personalities are all exaggerated caricatures that can be simply summed up as the dumb one, the fat stereotype one, the girl, and so on. Despite my critiques, I do think they work okay within the aesthetic of Lost World. The style of the game is blocky and extremely vibrant, and the landscapes of each world are exaggerated to a cartoonish degree, so they do work. The characterization of Sonic, Tails, and Eggman in Lost World are vapid and one note, tossing out cheesy one-liners and nothing more, going through what feels like a choreographed story. As for the gameplay, it has once again been overhauled, throwing Sonic into spherical levels where he has to traverse different directions. In a cruel twist of fate, the game that lacks a core identity is the one that closest resembles Sonic Extreme, a game that was responsible for the complete shakeup of the Sonic brand. Ironically, during development, Sega was trying to create a game that is, in their words, 100% Sonic. To say whether they failed or succeeded is tough, but I can say that the root of the game certainly doesn't have the Sonic feel, ringing closer to an imitation, trying to hit what they perceived fans would want, blending elements from the original games with more modern design elements, but ending up as a game that feels remarkably less Sonic than normal. And there is evidence to support this. as Takashi Iizuka stated during the Summer of Sonic convention that Sega wanted Mario fans to give Lost World a try due to its slower gameplay. And this is strictly my opinion here, but I feel that reaching out to Mario fans with your Sonic game, at best, is an awkward decision. Sonic Lost World would also be the first main Sonic title to forgo a vocal track, instead opting for the main theme of the game to be a whimsical instrumental tune, once again shaking things up for the aesthetic of the franchise. But while Lost World attempted to shake things up for Sonic, the next step would go even further than that. Sonic Boom. The next step on this trip through Sonic's history, and what a complicated one this is. Sonic Boom would be a complete overhaul for the Sonic brand and somewhat of a massive gamble. And before I go on, I want to mention that allegedly, Boom was never meant to replace the mainline iteration of Sonic. Despite this claim from Sega, no new Sonic games would be released during Boom's tenure aside from those featuring the Boom identity. So, who really knows? The intention of Sonic Boom was to provide a fresh coat of paint for the world of Sonic, reinvigorating interest in the franchise, kicking off with new games, a cartoon, and even comics. This initiative was done with the intent of honing in on the worldwide audience. And it's super apparent if you take one look at the design of Sonic and Pals. Each character was given a recognizable silhouette, as well as minor changes like accessories. But not just this, Sega leaned into the comedy element even more than in the past, capturing the vibe of a Western cartoon. Quick shout out to the Eggman design we got from Boom. I really do like him. His look is clearly inspired by old-timey aviators, which draws a parallel to Sonic's really early days. It also suits his mad scientist-inventor vibe. Overall, he's good. The move to appeal to a worldwide audience also meant that Sega would pass the development process off to a Western studio. Big Red Button would produce the Wii U Sonic Boom game, with Sanzaru Games handling the 3DS release. Big Red were seen as suitable candidates due to their staff's experience on large-scale adventure games. This shift to Western devs was done in order to keep everything consistent, as the cartoon was also being handled by Western studios. Sonic Team as well as Sega were really pushing for a new angle with Sonic, going all out with Boom. In this push for Western domination, so to speak, Sega initially didn't even plan to release Boom in Japan. This would later change as they did release it under the moniker Sonic Toon. The characterization of the cast was much more one-note, basing their personalities around a singular trait. Sonic was a bold leader, having the demeanor of an action-adventure film hero. Tails was the nerdy one, focused almost exclusively on his gadgets. Knuckles is a stereotypical meathead who was all brawn and no brains. Amy took the role of #girlboss and acted as the group's voice of reason. And joining the crew in this adventure would be Styx the Badger. While the plots vary between the Boom titles, they did carry a vision to them. They all feel as though there was ambition behind the work, aiming for a unique world, fresh and unlike anything Sonic fans had seen before. Unfortunately, the ambitions of Boom would not be enough to save it. The final products in the Boom universe vary from great, to mediocre, to downright broken. The Wii U title, Rise of Lyric, would receive low scores, with critics lamenting that the game was broken and buggy. One reviewer mentions that the cast never stopped talking, which they found very irritating very fast. The humor of the game felt outdated even for the time, making references to old memes or generic, "he's right behind me, isn't he?" type lines, showing that despite their push to embody trends at the time, Sega missed their target. The reviews for the two 3DS titles were a touch more generous. The first of them, Shattered Crystal, got middling reviews. Critics stated that the game felt like a slog and, again, drew attention to the bad humor. The sequel, Fire and Ice, would perform much better, though still not perfect. Lastly, the cartoon simply titled Sonic Boom was overall the most enjoyed product of the bunch. The show would follow an episodic formula leaning heavily on that comedy aspect I mentioned earlier, putting Sonic and his friends into any degree of outrageous situation. Boom would be a huge departure from the attitude of X. This is something that Iizuka himself would comment on, stating how X was aimed towards Japanese audiences, and now he wanted to take Sonic to a different demographic.
The whole thing started with the television series. Our previous series, Sonic X, was made in Japan and influenced by Japanese anime. The main audience it was made for was in Japan, although it came to the West as well. So Sonic Boom is something made specifically for the Western audience. For the TV series to be successful, we pretty much had to make it for that audience, and the games tie into that strategy.
The constant shift between trying to market Sonic to a Japanese audience versus a Western audience would be one of the major pitfalls the series fell into. By trying to gear Sonic to one direction and then to the other, the franchise's identity became muddled. When Sonic was at his most successful with regard to both fans and profit, it was when the games were being made without acknowledging barriers, rather being a sort of blend of aesthetics. Leaning too hard towards one direction caused Sonic to warp, leading to some of the series' lowest points. This is no more apparent than with Sonic Boom. This era of Sonic is the furthest from any other game or show in the series. In a way, this Sonic is the least Sonic to Sonic. Yet, he still remains true to the core traits. Sonic Team and Sega had felt like they were throwing darts at a board to see what stuck for years now. Boom being the furthest from the dartboard. Sega and Sonic Team going as far as handing the reins off to someone else for the main creative process, sort of seeming like, here, you try. And before we continue, I just want to say that if you really love any of these games that I've talked about today, that's fine. I'm not here to police anyone's enjoyment of stuff. Plus, I find a lot of these games enjoyable as well. I just do think it's worthwhile to discuss the shift in attitude, aesthetics, coolness, what they were doing, all of that. That's what I'm here for. Don't take anything personal. First announced at the 25th anniversary celebration for Sonic's birthday, Sonic Forces would be the next mainline title to be released. Development of Forces went as far back as 2013 when Lost World released. This project was ambitious, attempting to incorporate 3 totally different playstyles. Sega and Sonic Team were holding nothing back, trying to appeal to every one of their fans. Modern Sonic would play similarly to games like Unleashed and Generations. Classic would follow this, paralleling his Generations style as well. And then, the third would be entirely new, a customizable character who fights using weapons. This would be Sonic Team's first in-house project to release in over 5 years. Coinciding with Forces would be another title, Sonic Mania, a completely new experience in the style of the classic Genesis titles. Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles were all back touting their original appearances. Alongside them would be the first appearance of Mighty and Ray since the long-forgotten Sega Sonic the Hedgehog. Mania would be developed by Sonic Team with the help of Christian Whitehead, a fan whose work had gotten him recognized and then hired by Sega to help make that game happen. Both Forces and Mania were looking to be big. The games were tied together through the ending of Mania, which would release first. A new looming threat was lingering, the Phantom Ruby, a device that allows the user to distort dimensions and reality itself. If I didn't make it apparent already, things truly were appearing to look up. Sega was trying to understand what made Sonic so beloved by fans and deliver not 1, but 2 complete experiences. Things got dicey, for lack of a better word. Mania would release first and receive universal praise. Across the board, fans and critics adored Mania, calling it a triumphant return to form, offering endless replayability and plenty of callbacks for diehards to point out. The game functioned perfectly and had a lot to offer, properly capturing the thunder of days long gone. Next up was Forces, and well, it didn't pan out the same as Mania did. Forces was met with hesitation. Critics and fans were mixed, some enjoying it while others didn't. Negative points went towards the underdeveloped plotline feeling rushed. The gameplay was also criticized for being far too linear and the levels being really short. The positives for Forces included the visuals being good, the soundtrack being considerably solid, and the dynamic nature of some of the levels in the game. What I want to talk about most here is what Forces brought to the table. Something that had been missing in Sonic titles for years was the edge factor. A degree of unyielding coolness. Forces felt like the first Sonic game that wasn't afraid of critics mocking it. The series grew to have a stale feeling, and Forces marked the start of that change. Vocal songs made a return, one of which being an exceedingly edgy track about the main villain Infinite. There's large set pieces in Forces and a story that takes itself seriously. Multiple moving pieces including the Eggman army taking over the world, Infinite and the Phantom Ruby, in an underground bunker of Sonic's friends, spending their time discussing how war isn't pretty, and how to recapture the kidnapped Sonic. Though of course, the game wasn't perfect, and not everything managed to land or was that great. But what it did manage to do is succeed in reinvigorating things for Sonic. As every iteration of Sonic does, Forces took inspiration from trends at the time. Massive crossover events such as Infinity War definitely contributed to the setting of this game, showcasing all of Sonic's recognizable baddies as well as his friends. Brandishing its own sense of coolness, Forces adopted trends and blended them with the previous aesthetics of older Sonic titles. Thankfully, despite the mixed feedback, Sega didn't let this deter them. Unlike the past where negative feedback appeared to heavily influence the direction of Sonic, Sega is now moving past it. And since the release of Forces, it would appear that Sonic has been on an upward trend. He would make his Hollywood debut in 2020 with the release of the long-awaited Sonic the Hedgehog movie. After a rocky start and a complete redesign, the movie would see massive success. It would go on to gross over $300 million worldwide. Sonic 1, as I'll call it for simplicity, would be loved by critics and fans alike. The movie acted as a solid first outing for Sonic in the world of film, as well as a love letter to the series. A sequel would release in 2022 to even higher praise. Combining elements from the games with our world, both Sonic 1 and 2 took what fans loved about the series and gave it new life. On the horizon is now both a third Sonic film, as well as a Knuckles-centric show. Aside from the films, Sonic has also been the star of yet another cartoon. Sonic Prime, which released in late 2022, sees the blue blur traversing different dimensions, interacting with what-if versions of his universe. The inspiration for Prime is clear, with the current craze around multiversal settings, once more showing the franchise's tendency to parallel what is hot at the time. But enough about the supplementary stuff. It's time to traverse down another path. Sonic Frontiers. As of this video, the latest Sonic game. Frontiers released in late 2022 and took the series to new, frontiers. Featuring a completely open world, Frontiers broke new ground, giving players multiple islands to explore, each with their own unique layout. The plot of Frontiers centers around uncovering the mystery behind the Starfall Islands and reuniting with Sonic's scattered friends. There is depth to the plot as it strings together pre-existing lore with new information, showcasing that Sonic is still capable of telling a profound and enjoyable story. Front and center, Frontiers' ambition is clear, wearing the dedication of Sonic Team on its sleeve. There are massive boss fights where players take control of Super Sonic, generating true stakes and tension. Backing these fights are unique vocal tracks with that familiar yet new heavy sound. Frontiers truly puts players in the shoes of Sonic. The game also features new additions that are commonplace in modern gaming, such as a skill tree for Sonic to utilize and more in-depth combat. The characterization of not just Sonic, but everyone in Frontiers is airtight, playing off their established personalities while also doing something with the characters. Amy is both concerned with Sonic's well-being and the newly introduced Coco's. Knuckles is stubborn, but still willing to lend a hand to Sonic. There's a nice back-and-forth dynamic between him and Sonic, demonstrating their rivalry. Tails isn't just standing around like past entries, where he was reduced to the plot device and the gadget guy. He's actively invested with Sonic in uncovering the mysteries surrounding them. Eggman is also surprisingly great here, as he has an emotional storyline with Sage, giving him more to do than stand around and make quips with, his two robots. There is also the return of a theme that hadn't been relevant for some time. That theme being a focus on technology versus nature, seeing these mechanical monstrosities come to life as Sonic tries to preserve the island. The plight of the ancients as they tackle impending doom from the end. Not to mention Eggman's interactions with Sage, an AI that has developed feeling. All of these form around this theme in a cohesive way, and I find that really incredible. Everything in Frontiers is an apparent result of Sonic Team taking feedback from the fans and going somewhere with it. And it isn't just me interpreting it this way. Interviews show this as well.
After completing Sonic Forces, we are brainstorming on what to do next. We realize there's little room for evolution with a traditional 3D Sonic game. We'd only be able to make something that fans have seen before. That's why at the very start, we discussed as a team how to change this linear style of gameplay.
Of the many successes within Frontiers, one of the biggest is the attempt to unify Sonic lore under one umbrella. As opposed to each game feeling self-contained, the team behind Sonic are now dedicated to bringing everything together. Within Frontiers, Sonic makes a number of remarks that reference past games, events, or characters. Not just this, but there are lines of dialogue during cutscenes that confirm this. going back to a more serialized feel for the franchise, something that hadn't really been there since Sonic 06. With Frontiers acting as the basis for the future of Sonic, it would truly seem that Sonic is back and better than ever. The series that had lost its touch has finally found it again. And throughout it all, the highs and the lows, Sonic and those behind him never gave up, always trying to deliver an enjoyable experience for the dedicated fans. Just sometimes coming up short and missing out on what made Sonic so special. And besides Sonic Team and Sega, if it weren't for those same dedicated fans, then Sonic would have never gotten the chance to shine and prove himself once again. Gravity can't hold him down, because he's only at the beginning of this one-way dream. So, if you've made it this far, as always, thank you for watching. Sonic has always been super near and dear to me, and as I grew up with the games, I felt like over time there was something that became, weird, something that was missing, for lack of a better word. So, I did my best to dig deep and see what I could figure out. If you've enjoyed my analysis, then as always, please leave a like, a comment, all that stuff, subscribe, hit the bell, you know what to do. And, if you didn't like the video for whatever reason, that's fine too. Let me know where you think I can improve, or if I got something wrong, or if you disagree, whatever, let me know. Oh, and I always forget this, but here's my Twitter. I post stuff on there occasionally, such as this. That's me. Okay, but for real this time. Thank you once again. It's been Noyah.